that we present to a client when we start with them and say, here's the things that are going to put you in a good spot. Because at the end of the day, we want your home to be built. We're not going to suggest anything that's just an effort for you to spend money or waste time. We're really looking for solutions to help you get your house built. We're very much interested in that when we take on a project. So. Hi, this is Jack Baldwin. You're listening to By Design. I'm joined today by James Knight. James, how are you?
Hi, Jack. I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
Great. Today we're going to talk about how to set yourself up for success when taking on a home design project. So we wanted to talk about how to help people be as well prepared as possible for a design project. So James, what would be one of the very first things that a client should be thinking about in order to avoid some common pitfalls and common mistakes in the design process?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's so many different things to consider when starting a project, and we have such a variety of clients that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. The first thing to focus on could vary from project to project, but if we were to kind of list out maybe a couple of important items, right, and then the order in which you put them in, it may not be the most.
It's not formulaic, right? But there are certain things that we need in order to be prepared. For example, a site survey. So at some point in the process.
Exactly. And then it also comes down to like what type of site survey. So one of the questions we get often is like, what kind of site survey? Like the previous owners, when I bought the land, they passed it on to me. It's just a kind of a plat of the area, and it shows like the boundaries and things like that. Now you have to take a couple of steps here to realize what you need and ask yourselves a couple of questions. And if not, we'll ask the questions when we get on the meeting for you. But I think a site survey is probably the first real point I would ask for. Mm-hmm. Do you have one? The answer is often yes. Then we go into a little bit more depth, right? We look at, well, what type of site do you have? We have a lot of clients who are in the Georgia mountains, up in the hills, which is a great, beautiful part of the world. A lot of people do have surveys. What they don't have is topography surveys.
Right.
And one of the other things that they often have are, streams running through their properties. We're getting this quite often. Just sources of water, sources of, anything that you might be close to, things like that. So a topography survey gives us the lay of the land, gives us the slopes that we want to look at, right? Very important. Not all surveys are equal. Topography surveys typically have exactly what we need on them. They have the lay of the land, they have the boundaries, they have the setbacks, they have all those sorts of things. So they're a little bit more in depth. They do cost a little bit more money, obviously. But if you have a slope site, very important. They also give us setbacks from water sources, in case you're in a flood zone, items like that. Also very, very important. Make sure that we can build on your site. And we say that this is one of the first things to look at because essentially once we have this, we can say, well, is this site even viable? Here's the slope on it. It's not a flat site, so it's going to be a little bit more expensive to build on because, you may be looking at a basement. You may be looking at foundation walls. If there's a river at the bottom of it, how far up does that buffer zone to the river actually extend? How much area on the site can we actually build in? So there's a lot that goes into it. So calling out surveys, I think, is a very important item that should be on the list.
How often would you say that we need a site survey? And then how often would you say we need a topography survey? When do we need those things? Is it every time?
Yes, I would say every time.
Okay.
There's a few instances where we don't need them, and that is when we're just doing interior work. If you're not extending the house in any one direction, and we're just focusing on interiors, not needed as much.
And the topography.
If you're building,
sorry.
If you're building a new home, absolutely.
Yeah. And then topography, if somebody's got a pretty flat level ground? Do they still need a topography survey? Is it kind of a judgment call, or would we say every time we will count on a topography being a part of our design process?
Well, the preference is to always have topography, right?
Yeah.
Reason being is that it gives us the slope for the water. How is the groundwater going to run on your site, even if it's a relatively flat site? And we want to make sure that we get the setbacks from any flood zones. So if it is a flat site, ask yourself, what am I near that could cause a little bit of hassle? If it's a flat site, is it in a flood zone?
Right.
Because there's a few instances where, well, it's perfectly flat site, but it's actually on the side of the banks of a river. Well, that may not be as good a situation as we would hope for, because if we had a slope running down to the river, at least we would get some water runoff into the river instead of the pooling of water at the base of the site. So there's those sorts of things as well. So topography will give us that sort of information. But the first steps in a flat site would be, we would do our due diligence in the background, and we would just check the flood mapping of that area to start with. And if we needed some topography, if we needed some heights throughout the site to see, what level do we need to build at to get above the floodplain, for example,
right?
That's when a surveyor might have to come back and start verifying some items.
Okay. So one big way to avoid a common pitfall, to avoid something that will bite you in the butt later in the design and ultimately in the construction process, is having that site survey, having a topography. What about soil testing or
soil testing? Yeah, soil and septic, very important. It's often we get some soil testing done up front, which is good. Just make sure that you can actually build on your site. It gives us the idea of what the soil is made of. So it's important to get out ahead of that. Then when it comes to septic, some people have septic set up already. Some people are working on it. Some people can't apply for septic until they have a design for the home. Okay. Right. So
is that based on county, city, whoever's approving? Is that from place to place?
Yeah, absolutely. So there can be a different permit process depending on the place that you're living in.
Yeah.
The best advice that we can give to you at that point is get out ahead of it and talk to a septic team. Right. They know what they're doing when it comes to this sort of stuff. And you might not have a design ready to show them, but you can tell them about the lot, you can tell them about the slope, they can tell you about the process that's involved and how much information they need to start working on this for you and then with us, essentially, right? Because then they send that information back to us. We make sure that it's positioned appropriately. The last thing you want to do is get too far out ahead of it. Septic team comes in, they put pipes running across the lawn exactly where you want to build a house, and then all of a sudden you can't build there. Right. So use a little bit of common sense as well, I think. And connect everyone together. That's the most important thing. We need to be talking to them. You need to be thinking far enough out in advance. Yeah, some of the stuff is self-evident, but
it's just important. I think that the point there is it's important to at least have thought through those things ahead of time. What do I need to be prepared for? So yes, if the septic survey needs to come later, that's fine. But I know that part of the process is going to be at this point, and I'm coming prepared with these items ahead of time so that I'm setting myself up for a future success. So another question I get a lot is when should I bring in a builder? When do we bring in the builder? When do we want to start talking to a builder as a design team? When do we want the client to start talking to a builder? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do get this question quite often. Having a build team in place is very important early on, I would say. But a lot of builders won't talk to clients that don't have a design yet to show them.
Right.
That's kind of where
it's a chicken or the egg.
Yeah, I would say that it's important to get on the builder's radar so they know you exist. So you start having conversations with them, tell them that you're in a design process, but you're looking at, say, a 4-bedroom house on, this sort of lot. So they have something to work with. You start creating a conversation with them early on.
Yeah.
Essentially, what we aim to do is we aim to bring them in as soon as possible. So during the design phase that we have, as soon as we become happy with the design, it may not be a finished design, but as soon as we're happy with the size of the design, the rooms are in the right locations, things like that, we get that over to the contractor, right? And that's either we're talking directly to the contractor or it's via the client. Maybe the client is the main point of contact there, and they're sending it through to them. That way they're looking at something and being like, all right, so this is in the ballpark for square footage. This is how much it's going to cost you per square foot. That they may see a few things early on in the process that are specific to your site, or not every builder is the same. Some builders prefer to build on a crawl space versus on a slab, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So that might prompt them to say something that gets you scratching your head and being like, well, do I actually want to use this builder? Is it cheaper to do it that way versus this way? Because I was always thinking about doing a slab, and now I'm thinking about doing a basement, so... And that's come up a few times.
Yeah, it has. So. Yeah. Typically in our process, we meet with a client. To your point, a builder is typically not involved until they've got something in hand that they can have a conversation about. So we'll start working with the client, and we'll get a concept from them. We'll do a design kickoff call in which we hear the client's thoughts, collect their images and ideas. And then within a few weeks, we've submitted to the client a first attempt or a first schematic concept of what they've shared with us. And it's going to take some iterations. It's going to take some review to get it to a finalized concept, but it's a first step in the process. And I think we do a good job of encouraging our clients to take those, what we call schematic or concept drawings, but they include floor plans, they include elevations, they typically include a presumed or proposed site location that we can start with. Take that to your builder that you're talking to and get their thoughts on that. What would you say about that approach?
Yeah, absolutely right. And the builder might request more information or not, and then we just kind of roll with it and update it as we need to. But those sort of items are very important, I think.
Well, the effort there is, if we have a builder who really connects with the client, it's a good location, budget's worked out, there's good chemistry between the client and the contractor. But that first time that you've got a concept in hand and you hand it to that contractor, it's a talking piece. It's something that the contractor can respond to and go, oh yeah, well that's what we're trying to build. So here's how we can execute on this. Or have you thought about that? Have you thought about how this is going to work on this site? Or have you thought about, you want a 3-car garage, for example. Well, have you thought about the cost of a 3-car garage, and is that within your budget?
Yeah, one of the conversations we have often with clients is between heated space and unheated space.
Right. And
we get a lot of clients who come in. This might be a whole nother conversation that we'll have to have next time.
Part 2.
But yeah, exactly. I want 4,000 square foot of heated space. And then you're like, okay, I understand what you're saying. But what they're saying to us right there is that they're not including the garage in it, and a lot of times they're not including a basement and stuff like that. Well, those things aren't free. They don't just come with the building, right?
Right. Right.
So, I mean, we'll talk about this in depth next time, but it's more than just that heated space. And the builder knows that sort of thing. So getting out in front of a builder early on and being like, well, we want a 3-car garage, like you're saying, but we haven't included that in the heated space. And he's going to come back and be like, well, just to do that, it's like this figure, right? And you're like, oh, well, I didn't think of that. We were just thinking about the 4,000 square feet of heated space.
Right.
So that's a good example of like, well, how a builder can like influence you very early on and be like, actually, you need to start considering a few more items here that you might want to make a choice on, changing it to 2-car or whatever you need to do. So
yeah. That's very helpful. And yeah, I think you're right. I think we need to have a continued conversation about how to be well prepared. But I think just kind of talking through the surveys, talking through some of the items on the checklist that we present to a client when we start with them and say, here's the things that are going to put you in a good spot. because at the end of the day, we want your home to be built. We're not going to suggest anything that's just an effort for you to spend money or waste time. We're really looking for solutions to help you get your house built. We're very much interested in that when we take on a project. So, James, thanks for your thoughts. Great conversation, and look forward to continuing next week.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.